Hello everyone, welcome to our lesson on ECG and the control of the heartbeat. Please can you pause the video and complete your progress bar using the below learning objectives. If you're not sure how to complete this, just remember that, for example, for learning objective number 1, if you feel really confident, then you might put number 1 up here. If you don't feel very confident, you might put number 1 down here. So just decide on your confidence for each of those learning objectives and pop the numbers onto the progress bar. Next, I'd like you to pause the video and complete activity 1. This is just a review of stuff that we did before Christmas. So a little bit of recall about the heart structure, the cardiac cycle. There's also a really straightforward exam question for you to complete and mark. Please pause the video and try these 3 questions. Okay, so these are 3 key concepts that you guys need to understand in order to understand the electrical conduction in the heart. So first one, how is the heartbeat controlled? Well, the heart muscle is described as myogenic. Myo translates as kind of muscle, so you often see that at the start of anything talking about muscle. And genic is like origin. So the heart muscle originates its own electrical impulse, and this actually comes from a part of the heart called the SAN or sinoatrial node. We'll come on to where that is in a minute. What is meant by action potential or wave of depolarization? So you're going to hear this throughout the video, and basically an action potential or depolarization of part of that cardiac tissue is where you get nervous stimulation. Now what this will result in is the cardiac muscle contracting. So whenever you see that you're getting a wave of depolarization, that basically means that you're going to get contraction in that part of the heart. And we know that the fancy word for contraction in this topic is systole. Finally, what is meant by repolarization? So this is the opposite of depolarization. So don't worry too much about what's happening on sort of a cellular level here. We'll actually come back to this more next year. But basically, it's when the membrane potential of that nervous tissue is reset. Again, you'll understand that in much more detail next year, so don't worry too much about that. But we do need to use this key term. And all you really need to think about with repolarization is that it leads to the cardiac muscle relaxing. Okay, so that will result in diastole, as we know is the fancy word in this topic. So next we're going to talk through the electrical control of the heartbeat, and to start off with, we know that the heart muscle is myogenic, so it originates its own electrical stimulation. That doesn't come from the brain, it comes from the heart, and it actually starts in a part of the heart called the sinoatrial node, and we can see the sinoatrial node over here. And the sinoatrial node releases the electrical impulse that starts the heartbeat, and that's going to cause a wave of excitation or a wave of depolarization across the atria. So that impulse is going to spread across from the SAN or the sinoatrial node across both atria. And as we know in the cardiac cycle, both sides of the heart beat at the same time. The next thing that's going to happen is that that impulse isn't going to continue and travel down into the ventricles, and the reason for that is that we've got an insulating layer that actually prevents that. And the insulating layer, I'm just going to draw in purple here, you can see that that actually sits between the atria and ventricles and stops the impulse from travelling from the atria straight down into the ventricles. Now that's really important for a couple of reasons. The first one is that it allows for a delay in the contraction of the atria compared to the ventricles. So it means that the ventricles can fully fill up with blood before they contract. And the second thing is that it allows the ventricles to contract from the base upwards. And as you can see here, we have to have the ventricles contracting from the base upwards because that's where the blood will need to exit from the ventricles. Okay. So next, as that impulse spreads across the atria, it actually initiates the atrioventricular node, and you can see that over here in the right atrium, just underneath the SAM. And the atrioventricular node actually allows a little delay before sending that impulse down to the apex of the heart, the base of the heart. Next, the impulse will be passed from the atrioventricular node down the bundle of His, and you can see that the bundle of His here is located in the septum of the heart, okay, and that's the bit in the centre that separates the right and left sides of the heart. The impulse reaches the apex, which is the bottom of the heart here, before spreading up through the Purkinje fibres, okay, and the Purkinje fibres, which are located here, when that impulse spreads across them, it actually causes the ventricles to depolarize and therefore contract. So that actually causes ventricular systole. And ventricular systole, as you guys know, means that the ventricles will contract, and they're actually going to contract from the base up, or the apex, which is here, upwards. And that means that they're going to squeeze the blood up and out through the aorta and also pulmonary artery. So based on what we just spoke about, I'd like you to pause the video and to rearrange these key terms into the sequence to describe the electrical control of the heartbeat. So just take a couple of minutes to do that. And here are the answers for those, so maybe just check and see that you got them in the right order. You might want to pop this onto a flashcard so that you can test yourself later on. Next, I'd like you to have a go at activity 2, please. There's 2 parts to this. So the first part is to follow this link and to watch a video that kind of summarises what we've been talking about in the last 2 or 3 slides. The second link is to the hyperheart, and you've looked at that before Christmas. So this is a really good animation just to slowly step through and to link what's happening in the ECG trace with what's happening in the heart during the cardiac cycle. So pause the video and have a go at activity 2 and then come back and we'll talk through the ECG trace. So we're going to talk through this ECG trace, and one thing just to note here is that as you have electrical activity, it's in the heart, it's reflected on an electrocardiogram by these little bumps and the changes in this trace. Okay, so this black line here is that changes. You can see that directly reflects the electrical activity in the heart. So the first thing that happens, as you guys know, in the electrical control of the heart is that the sinoatrial node here releases an electrical impulse that sends a wave of depolarization across the atria. So that's going to spread across both atria at the same time. Now, if this individual is hooked up to electrodes and their electrical activity of their heart is monitored on an ECG trace, that activity or that wave of depolarization spreading across the atria, you can see will be reflected in this part here of the ECG trace, the P wave. Now that is going to cause atrial systole within the cardiac cycle. Okay, so remember that the electrical activity will cause the heart muscle to either contract or relax. Secondly, we can see that we have this really big electrical activity here, the QRS complex, and it's a really big electrical activity because this is when the wave of depolarization is spreading across the ventricles, okay, and causing ventricular systole. So the bigger the electrical activity, the reason that it's bigger is because the ventricles have more cardiac muscle tissue. And then finally, we know that the heart is going to move into diastole, is going to relax, and we can see that here by the T wave. The T wave is the repolarization of the heart, and again that's going to lead to the heart muscle completely relaxing, so all of the heart is going to be in diastole at this point. Now you do actually have atrial diastole happening here during ventricular systole, but actually you can't see that on the ECG because the QRS complex is so large. Okay, so that's basically the ECG trace. Cool. Next, I'd like you just to pause the video and go back to your progress bar and just see if any of your learning objective numbers have moved, see if you feel a bit more confident about any of them. We're going to use this to basically help us decide on what activities to do in the next part of the lesson. So pause the video and try that. Okay, and depending on how you rated yourself on the progress bar, that should help you decide on what tasks you want to complete. We'd recommend here spending about 30 minutes and ideally completing at least 2 of these tasks. Now, if you're not very confident, you might want to start here. So if you feel like you're not totally confident on understanding the ECG trace, I'd recommend starting here on this activity, the ECG lower level activity, and maybe even sending an image of your answers onto your team's channel just to see what other people have put. You can always ask questions on the channel as well, or you can jot them down. You can always ask them in lesson later on this week. If you feel a little bit more confident about understanding the ECG and you just want to test yourself, then you can come straight in and start at this activity here, which is a simple sort of description of that process. If you feel confident, maybe you've completed this activity, the ECG higher level activity, and you want to apply yourself a bit more, we've got some exam questions, so this will be a bit more application. And then there's also an extension activity for anyone who wants to further practice ECG questions. Please remember as well, if you are looking for additional stuff to do on this topic, if you go to the Useful Documents tab, if you go to the iHeart Revision tab and have a look in the exam questions by topic, there's lots and lots under transport and animals. So do feel free to explore the VLE and to use those resources as well. Okay, finally, there's a Kahoot on your activity to have a go at just to test your knowledge. And you might just want to pop back to your progress bar and just see how confident you are at these learning objectives. Maybe just jot down any questions you've got that you want to ask in class. Okay, thank you.